So in this video, we're going to be talking about art in Athens at the cusp of the Archaic period and how it reflects and helps to bring about the changes and transformations in Athenian society. So art in the Archaic period is undergoing the kinds of changes that we've already talked about with reference to the Archaic period. In other words, there is a greater emphasis on variety, a greater emphasis on expression, a greater emphasis on the subjective and the personal. This is more true in poetry. Visual art has more to break free from. In other words, visual art has direct connections to certain formulas of style that the Greeks inherit from both their ancestors and from the people that they are interacting with in the East, from Mesopotamia and Egypt. And bear in mind that the Greeks are aware that their society, their culture, is a newcomer. That Egyptian and Mesopotamian culture is millennia older than the Greeks, and so as a result, the Greeks start out the Archaic period willing to follow the lead of the East in visual art, and the result of this is a sort of characteristic stiffness of expression, a characteristic formulaic approach that is sort of that is originally sort of stiff jointed in a sort of literal and metaphorical way. In sculptures and in relief, and in frescoes and so forth like this, we can see a gradual shift away from this. We've already seen examples of this with respect to the kouros and kore, the statues of young men and women that are used in votary and funereal rites. We can also see it. So something like this archaic relief reflects both a certain expectation of the disposition of the male form, that it acts in a certain way, and shows an effort to move away from that in attempting to show a little bit more fluidity. So this piece is sort of transitional in that respect. Part of what is involved in this discussion is that a lot of the visual art that would be seen on a day-to-day basis in the Archaic period would be on pottery. And so pottery is a little bit more limiting in this sense. Pottery is the traditions, especially the way things are represented in pottery, make it more difficult to show facial expression in a tiny space, and the tradition is to show people in profile, and so people are distinguished according to dress, height, and other superficial characteristics, and the emphasis comes on the tableau and increasingly on action. The original form of pottery decoration that is prevalent in the Archaic period is the black figure decoration, which uses color in the way that you see here. This is replaced by red figure, which is developed as a distinctly Athenian form that spreads rapidly out from Athens from around 520 onward. Red figure, it makes use of a great deal more versatility and places a heavy emphasis on action, but also allows for a greater degree of nuance as well. And so the depictions famous scenes, famous mythological events, and legendary figures, which often decorate the amphorae and the crater and other pottery forms. These are become more developed, become more sophisticated at the by the time we get to the end of the 6th century and Athens is entering the classical period, this is the period in which Athens is becoming more and more influential in its art and in the expressiveness of its art. And so we see depictions of different kinds of ideas, not just famous historical figures, but also certain aspects of everyday life, and shifts in ideas of composition, experiments in, even if you are engaging in the presentation of figures in profile with limited facial expression, you can still invest a great deal of detail in the dress that is present, in the action that is taking place, and also the balance of the imagery. So, for example, the artist that we see here is well known for creating balanced, symmetrical presentations, tableaus that involve interaction through the positioning of the figures involved. Sculpture undergoes a massive transformation as we get to the end of the 6th century and into the 5th. One of the most famous of Athenian artists is a sculptor called Myron. Myron is, unfortunately, most of his works are lost to us, but we have a number of ancient accounts that talk about the brilliance of his sculpture, and the Minotaur that we see here, that's from a lost composition that involves Theseus as well. The works of Myron tend to be tend to evoke potential action, potential fluidity, and not just at an overall level, like the movement of an arm to throw, or the running of a figure or something like this. Although one of his most famous works was a work that depicted a famous Olympic runner that was said to be one of the best works of sculpture that many observers had ever seen. But also at the more subtle level, and on a smaller scale, in a figure like this, you can feel the surface of the marble as if it were skin. You can see the potential for the rippling of the abdominals, of the blinking of the eye. The marble becomes translucent, like the exteriors of living beings themselves. Another famous work that we don't have anymore, we have only through Roman reproduction, is the discus thrower, Discobolus. And once again, the emphasis here is not just on the motion that is about to take place, but also on the motion and vibrancy at the micro level, at the level of the muscles, and the level of the possibility, the capability of the human body itself, and of the male form especially. What's particularly noteworthy about all of this is that as Athens experiments with all of this artistic expression is by and large public. Some of the artwork that we're seeing is designed to be exhibited in private homes of the most wealthy, but most of the art that we're talking about is art that is part of the public experience. This is particularly and especially true when we're talking about architecture, but also public sculptures and reliefs that are present on all of the important buildings that are surrounding the agora, that are part of the daily experience of the ordinary populace. And these are depicting important elements of history and mythology, but they are also exhibiting the capabilities of the human figure and intended to inspire people to understand the possibilities of what can be accomplished through artistic expression. And so, even when you are talking about memorials and gravesite monuments, a great deal of effort takes place, goes into eliciting what art is capable of doing. In this case, an effort is made for this very famous grave stelae to evoke the essence of this girl who died and the kinds of things that made her happy, a moment that exemplifies and crystallizes this girl. And makes her, makes that moment of life still present amongst its observers, to permanently endow life on a moment. This is what excited the Greeks about the possibilities of expression. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that what we have now is a sculpture that has been weathered, sculpture in which the paint and other decorations that the Greeks and all of the ancients used with reference to their art has gone away, and so. It's difficult for us to say, the extent to which the paintings would have looked something like this. We have very little way of knowing. This is so a restoration like this looks somewhat gaudy to us. We don't know exactly what the sculptures and artwork of the Greeks look like in everyday life. Other than to say that the sculptures were not pure white, and so any, poetry that you may be moved to read or write about the purity that is embraced by the whiteness of Aphrodite's bosom in some sculpture that you're looking at, it's important to remember that this was not the way that it would have originally been viewed by the Athens. There would have been some color. Whether it was this intense, is a subject of great debate among the art historians of ancient Greece. Likewise, architecture. Architecture, of course, is the most public of public arts, and something here like the Parthenon, which was built in the in the middle of the heyday of classical Athens in the mid 5th century, would have exemplified the majesty that art is capable of demonstrating, and would have included a good deal of sculpture in the frieze above the pillars. Much of which has also been reconstructed images of the gods and mythological figures within would have been a sculpture of Athena. Interestingly enough, you can go and visit the reproduction of the Parthenon, which has been built in Tennessee, which contains the statue that is no longer there in Athens, and attempts to elicit what this looks like. And this is probably the only reason to watch the first Percy Jackson movie. So we've already talked about lyric poetry. We've already talked about how lyric poetry is a transition from the top-down objective poetry of epic poetry of the Dark Age into the subjective personal poetry of the Archaic period. This is expressed through Sappho and Artemidorus and other important figures of lyric poetry. The effect of lyric poetry is part of a broader phenomenon that empowers speech. In particular in Athens. So we see lyric poetry throughout the Aegean world, but oratory becomes more and more important in Athens as the citizen body is more empowered, and the ability and need to convince them of what is necessary through reason and speech and rhetoric becomes an art. This is important not merely in terms of speeches involving public policy, but also oratory and sort of the written form of oratory, written rhetoric that is involved in attempting to use expression in order to influence social customs. And so we see this taking place with respect to history. After the Persian Wars, the story of the Persian Wars is written down and performed in public readings by Herodotus in order to help people to understand why this war occurred and what it means about being Greek and how the Greek culture compares to other cultures elsewhere in the world, not just the Persian, but also the Egyptian and so forth. This is writing for for a driven purpose, just like oratory, just like poetry, and from this we also get the movement that brings us drama and comedy as art designed to bring about public change through either the reinforcement or the attack on customs, morals, and beliefs of the entire Athenian populace. And we'll see how that plays out in coming weeks. And so for now, that's that.